here in the South American Mycorrhizal Research Network video blog. This time we are with Nadejda Soudzilovskaia from from Leiden University in the Netherlands, and she has this very interesting paper in New Phytologies here called FungalRoot, a global online database of plant mycorrhizal associations. Personally, I think that this paper is very, very interesting and very much needed because um, we need to know mainly which mycorrhizal types are more abundant and where they are located. So Nadia was the lead author of this paper, and she will comment us today a little bit about this. So, how this paper and how this database came about, and why it's important.
Yeah, there is now growing evidence that mycorrhiza are really very important for functioning of the ecosystems. But to make any conclusions about this and to understand what different types of mycorrhiza are doing actually in the ecosystem, we need to link plants which are growing in certain locations, certain ecosystem to their mycorrhizal type. So basically we need to know which plant species has which mycorrhizal type and also how intensively it is colonized by mycorrhizal fungi. And for this, we need this information. And till now, this information was certainly present, but it was scattered across very many databases and very many individual studies, partly repeated from database to database. So if you simply combine all the databases together, you get tens millions of records, but this, often it is the same information repeated from one study to another study. And also a lot of information at the same time is hidden because it is published in languages which are not very common in scientific use, while still many people are using them, for instance, in Chinese, in Spanish, in Russian. So we took an effort to gather all this data together, to clean it up, to trace all the records to the original database or original publication. And in case it was repeated, we don't mention all repeating publications, but we mention only original publication. And so by now, I do believe that this is the most exhaustive database covering all, well, not all, probably not entirely all, but most of the knowledge which we currently have about mycorrhizal types of plant species.
And in the database, you consider root colonization and mycorrhizal type, right?
Yes.
Uh, have you considered in the future to incorporate other mycorrhizal traits or other mycorrhizal effects? For example, Mari Mora, in a famous paper of 2014, she talks about flexibility and dependency, or other people have simply collect like things on the responses of plant growth. I know it's a lot to ask, but I think that this is like a first step to further consider these other traits or effects.
Yeah, that's we thought about it to make database even more exhaustive, or to focus solely on mycorrhizal types, intensity of colonization, and geographical records about and details about ecosystems where this information was collected. And we have opted for the latter because so more information you put in the same database, if we would add data similar to Marimora has presented and data on responses, so more databases prone to the errors, while other authors, for instance, like Mora, they also take very good efforts in providing information about mycorrhiza. And with current technologies, it's not difficult to link two databases together if each of the databases is accurate enough. So we rather wanted to focus on creating exhaustive and accurate database on with less types of information, but as many species covered. And we, of course, very open to link it to help people to link it to the other data.
That would be very interesting, like to link the different databases that already exist. This paper was very interesting because I was at ICOM last year, and there's a lot of discussion currently going on. For example, in the introduction, you mentioned that there has been like a misdiagnosis of what a mycorrhizal type is, or different people have take like very old papers, decades old papers, to say this is an ectomycorrhizal plant or this is an arbuscular mycorrhizal plant. What do you have to say about that? How this came about? Why do you consider these are incorrect assignments of mycorrhizal types?
Well, first to make it clear, we discuss those things in introduction because I also agree that it's very important issue and it's currently very hot topic in scientific literature. But in a database itself, we never say certain assignment is incorrect. What we do say, we provide always original information which has been published somewhere. And this information can report for given species, it is arbuscular mycorrhizal, for instance, or ectomycorrhizal. And then we have expert opinions, and experts have possibility to say they think it is wrong assignment. So database does not claim assignment is wrong. Database claims given expert, you know, his name thinks it is wrong. And as expert opinions are based on the current definitions, currently most common definitions of mycorrhizal types, but those, of course, do vary. So each expert has his own opinion and his own set of definitions used. And we urge our experts also to mention based on what criteria this decision about whether it is correct or incorrect assignment has been made. So we try to provide our users with the most complete information. Not everybody is expert on mycorrhiza, so some people might just blindly believe the database. And we would like to have at least possibility to warn them that for some of the records, there are doubts whether this information is correct or not. And I do think that we as experts have a right to do it, and we must do it.
Do you know how prevalent are these misdiagnoses or these assignments where there is conflictive or contradictive literature? One paper says it's arbuscular, or says it's not mycorrhizal. Is too much? Is too little? How prevalent is this?
It is not extremely common, but for some species, yes, it is a case. And what is worrying that it is for some very common species. So in terms of species numbers, it is not large issue, it is a few percent. But in terms of common species having this kind of misdiagnosis, or at least being that could be suspected for misdiagnosis, the numbers are higher. But still, it is not the reason to think that for every species we must doubt. Mm-hmm. It is something what does exist, but it's not overall overall present issue.
There was a recent paper of Lejo discussing of northern hemisphere species where I think that this was the scenario, like common species where people don't know exactly the mycorrhizal type, and I think that he and Brundet published recently, like trying to set the record to which mycorrhizal type this European species belong. Um, and in the same topic, because one common discussion is regarding arbuscular mycorrhiza. So some people say that, or in your paper, the definition is to assign an arbuscular mycorrhiza is with arbuscules, right?
Yes.
While other authors accept other structures like vesicles and hyphae. Hyphae and vesicles, I think that they are could be related to suppression of pathogens or other functions not related to nutrition,
Mhm.
but still important functions. So how we can solve this? Because I know this is a debate broader or is a debate apart from the database, but still is crucial to the development of this database and other databases. How do you think we can solve this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I'm only slightly involved into these discussions because, yeah, since I was assembling this database, I run into this problem. So I'm not a core expert on the diagnostic features, but my point of view is that for the database, the most important is to provide as exhaustive information as possible. So that's why we have multiple records for the database in the database. If we have found for the same species, and was very often the case, multiple papers mentioning the mycorrhizal type, we mention them all. And there are species for which it is 100 and even 1,000 papers which have examined the mycorrhizal type. And then we give a possibility to experts to give their opinion whether it is correct assignment or not, and if they think it is incorrect, why. And I think the latter is also very important because we see in a history of mycorrhizal development of mycorrhizal science that definitions change.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure in 20 years they might be also slightly different or more detailed definitions about what is arbuscular mycorrhiza and what is ectomycorrhiza. And of course it will change as kind of assignments. And for some studies, it is absolutely irrelevant, and for some, it is very critical. So we should allow scientists to decide themselves whether they should trust the data or not, and whether they should include the data or not in their particular assessments.
So the database is open for this kind of um, different assignments. For example, if I found one ectomycorrhizae without Hartig net or some other criteria that differs, is possible to upload this information, right?
Yes, absolutely. The database is open, so it is possible, and we really invite the colleagues to share the data with us, to add the core data, and also to act as an expert on commenting the data. You cannot do it really directly online. You should contact us via. Via email. It is we need, of course, to have a technical check on the data, but we try to be very inclusive, and we invite people to add the data to the database and to add their opinions as well.
I also really like it that you mentioned, or during the introduction, I think that you mentioned dual mycorrhizal plants because they were largely like ignored, but you are considered this into the database, and this is quite important. Can you tell me a little bit how the data was analyzed, or how was the search criteria? How was this conducted?
Yeah, it is. There are not that many plants which are dual mycorrhizal, so we were on one hand simply analyzing the data, which is the data records. So if for the same species you have you have information that it has one type of mycorrhiza and another type of mycorrhiza, this species is automatically suspected to be dual mycorrhizal. And then we were considering expert opinion about the accuracy of each of the diagnoses. And in the majority of cases, when species is mentioned several times as one type and several types of another one as another type, we record them as provisionally dual mycorrhizal. And again, in the core database, you simply see the records. You see you can extract yourself data for species you are interested and see that 30 times it was recorded as one type of mycorrhiza and 10 types of another type of mycorrhiza. And as a researcher, you could make your own conclusion whether it is dual colonization or not. And in summaries of the data which we present in the paper, we were making this conclusion ourselves based on our expertise, and then we make conclusions about how widespread is the phenomenon of dual colonization.
And coming back to the topic of mycorrhizal types that could be misdiagnosed, right? That you mentioned that besides the literature, there are expert opinion saying why this particular taxa can be misdiagnosed. Is this explanation in the database or is elsewhere on the reasons to why a particular taxa is misdiagnosed?
Currently, it is not in a current version of the database, and that's where we really would like to improve. What is information which is currently available is who is an expert. So in every case, there are not that many misdiagnosis cases. So in every case, there is a possibility to contact the expert in person and to find out the reasons.
Okay, perfect. And I guess that some of the main reasons were because of the staining or because maybe some microscope things or all methods, who knows?
Yeah, there are very different reasons indeed, and often it is a combination of reasons.
Also, I found also something very interesting. You say that to assign a particular genus to a mycorrhizal type or as a non-mycorrhizal plant, there is like a threshold of 67% of reports. Why this particular percentage? Could be lower, could be higher.
Yes, it is. It was rather arbitrary decision. We had to take a threshold somewhere. So we thought that 30%, 1/3 of the data having, well, 2/3 of the data being consistent is enough to consider given mycorrhizal species to be given genus to be to have given mycorrhizal type.
What do you think are the main results of this database? How successful was? How many regions of the world could you cover? How successful was this exhaustive search?
Well, I think in terms of covered published data, it is quite successful. And what is also very important that though it's only a few, only about 5 to 10% of total plant species covered, but it is most common plant species. So in terms of biogeographical coverage, it is we know for quite quite many species which are widespread on Earth. We know their mycorrhizal type, and I think it's very important to have it all together, to have this information to be gathered all together in a database. And in terms of gaps, yeah, tropics and tropical countries are traditional gaps in any kind of biodiversity, biogeography data. There is still many species which have not been investigated, and it is reflected in our database as well. What is, however, quite special is that another typical white spot on the maps, the ex-Soviet Union territory, is relatively well covered because we have included the previously published database on Soviet Union mycorrhiza.
Okay. Yes, you mentioned here that you obtained like 36,000 observations from 14, almost 15,000 plant species. So that's a lot. But as you said, so there are many biomes that remain to be studied. Um, in the paper, you also consider also, something very important, um, because you present this graph where only arbuscular mycorrhiza or ectomycorrhiza is examined versus the results when everything is examined. So do you think this is important? Because, for example, in new species or in species that may have debate regarding the mycorrhizal type, would the results be different if only one mycorrhizal type or one staining is done versus when everything is done, everything is examined?
Yeah, I think it is important, especially for tropical species, especially for tree plants, because I do think that the major conclusion that most of great majority of herbaceous plants are either non-mycorrhizal or arbuscular mycorrhizal still holds. But among trees, you can have arbuscular mycorrhiza, ectomycorrhiza, some ericoid mycorrhiza, or all kind of combinations. And for temperate regions, we know it quite well. But tropical species are quite under-examined, so I think we could have interesting discoveries there.
Um, yes, I mean, in the discussion, you say that only 5% of vascular plant species have been examined, which is a very low number. Do you think that when more data is added, these patterns that you have that are quite similar to what we know already from, for example, from the Reed 1991 paper or the Brundelt Antederso paper from 2018, it seems like the geographical or the biogeographical patterns are similar. But do you think that when we have way more than 5%, that is a very low number, these biogeographical patterns will sustain, will be the same?
I think they will. I think 5% of species sounds very little. On another hand, very many species are absolutely subdominant in the ecosystems. Still, even tropical ecosystems, as we know from papers of Hans Terstegen about South America, for instance, there are still dominant plant species, which are maybe multiple dominants in the same ecosystem, but it is much smaller number of species which are really creating large, covering large territories and creating large biomass. And those are obviously much more studied because they are easier to find. And most of those are in the database. Therefore, I think particularly geographical patterns would not change dramatically if we would have very exhaustive data about mycorrhizal types of plant species.
So plant cover is mainly covered by this database. I mean, the main components of plant cover around the world seems to be covered.
Yes, well, I do believe it because one of the outcomes of this database is that the database is also used in our recent Nature Communication paper, where also this, a few people who were authors in database are also authors on that paper, where we present global maps of distribution of mycorrhizal types, so making a much more detailed and exhaustive map compared to the paper of David Reed of 1991. And what we saw is that our data is obviously way more detailed. We go to 10 geographical minutes, but general patterns are still the same.
And in almost to finish, in the Brundred and Tederso paper of an phytologist in 2018, they used this phylogenetic approach to make these assignments, which I know it has been a bit controversial by some people, but it's been also widely used. Are the results from your database similar or are different to this phylogenetic approach?
Yeah, I have very similar patterns. It is in this sense, two papers are very consistent, and it is about number of plant species which have different mycorrhizal types. So it is very consistent patterns. Most of plant species on Earth are arbuscular mycorrhiza, like around 70%. About 2% are ectomycorrhiza, 10% orchid, 10% non-mycorrhizal. This plus minus one or two, but generally it is very consistent conclusions. Yes.
Perfect. And just to finish, one last thing that you want to say, a conclusion about your database?
Yeah, on one hand, me and all the co-authors are extremely proud of the database. We do believe it is considerable step which will move science forward. On another hand, of course, there are a lot of possibilities to further improve it in terms of adding data, adding expert opinions, and making data more precise and accurate. And that's why we want to keep this data open. So we invite people to collaborate with us and to provide, to help us to improve the database. On the other hand, the data is open, so anybody can download it and use it for the analysis. But if there are questions, concerns, we are also very happy to help, to help and to assist in the analysis which emerge from this data.
Okay, Nadia, thank you very much. It was a very interesting talk. Thank you very much for your time. I hope everything in Netherlands is going okay. And see you next in the
Horizon.
yes. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Cesar.